Hey everybody, we are currently going through a series with our 5th through 8th graders on Sunday mornings as well as our high schoolers on Sunday evenings, all about sex, sexuality, how to view it through a godly lens. And so we've got some of that content up and we'll have more coming out over the next couple of weeks. But this last Sunday we talked about a very important topic, and that is how we integrate technology into this conversation, which obviously lends itself to the topic of porn. And how do we as Christians deal with this? And I recognize that there are many parents out there who have discovered their kids viewing pornography, or if you haven't yet, you probably will at some point, because statistically speaking, pornography is not the exception, it's the norm, especially amongst the young generation. And so even going back to 2016, a study found that 67% of young males, as well as 57% of females, viewed pornography, young males and young females. And so this is something that's common. It's unfortunately getting younger and younger as technology becomes a much more common thing. And so the point of this video is not to scare you as parents, but to give you some action steps, give you some hope. So I'm gonna start with some ways to respond if you find your kid is viewing pornography. So how are we gonna respond to that? What's a good approach? All that kind of stuff, as well as some practical steps that you can take, whether that be as reactionary measures or preventative measures. And so kind of the application steps will apply to both. And so I really want to go into this quickly and give you as much information in a short amount of time as possible so that this can be helpful for you and your family. So first off, let's talk about how to respond when you find out that your child has been viewing pornography. And for some parents, this happens at a younger age. Some parents, this happens in the teenage years. Sometimes it catches parents off guard. Sometimes parents have suspicions, and so they go and search history and discover this. So sometimes kids just feel guilty and want to confess it. And so actually that's a good segue and good time to point out that this last week while we talked about this topic, so it's going to be fresh on many of your kids' brains, this next week we're going to talk about how there's power in confession. And so if they haven't come to talk to you about an issue that they're wrestling with in this topic, then they might. And that's a great thing. You want them to be able to come and talk to you. You want to be the kind of parent that your kids love to talk to you about anything, and including some of the awkward, hard things. And so first thing to do when you find this out is, one, don't panic. Whether you're discovering this in their search history or they're coming and talking to you and confessing to you, don't panic. Don't freak out. Stay calm. Because your response is going to clue them in on how vulnerable they can be with you in the future, or even in the very next sentence that comes out of their mouth. And so you don't want to shut down the conversation. You want to create an environment where the conversation can continue. And if this has already happened and you didn't respond calmly, that's okay. You can always go back later and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I freaked out a little bit, but it's because I care about you, and I don't want you to have to deal with something like this at such a young age. And so you can repair, you can admit you're human. That's not a bad parenting move, but then you establish the action steps moving forward. And if they're the ones that told you about it, if they confess to you about it, or even if you have to ask them some questions and they're honest with you, thank them for their honesty. Say, hey, you know what? Thanks for your courage. Thanks for your honesty. I know that was tough to admit. You know, stuff like that. That's going to go so much further in you being able to actually have a relationship with your child and build on that with any issue, but especially with this issue moving forward. So make it clear that you love them, you want to help them, you're there for them. Maybe share a little bit of your story, whether it's in this area or a different area in life, but maybe it's your first exposure when, I remember the first time I saw something, and it's a way that you can be vulnerable and, again, be human to your kid without compromising your authority or anything like that. So make sure that you love them, because this conversation is an opportunity for you to get to demonstrate how God loves us. How many times have you made mistakes? How many times has God forgiven you for the things that you did wrong, even when you knew that you were doing things wrong? Ask some probing questions. You want some information, and you want it because it can be helpful for how you move forward and helpful to your conversations. You want to express care and concern for them and express it through questions such as, man, how long have you been struggling with this? How long has this been an issue for you? How much have you been exposed to? What kinds of content have you seen? And this is important because this actually does play into other issues as far as the type of content they're seeing. A lot of pornography is violent in nature, and according to Pornhub, I think it was this last year, so in 2022, the third most search type of porn was trans porn. So this plays into orientation and socially contagious issues as it pertains to gender and sexuality. So what have you been exposed to? What have you seen? It's good for you to know these kinds of things, know what to be looking out for, and help them to course correct and their mental development as well as it pertains to these issues. And so that's a good question. How much has this affected you? Has this been something that's been weighing heavily on you for a while now, or is this something that you were embarrassed? Did you have more curiosity about it? And that's how's this affected you? Those are loving, concerning questions that will also provide good information for you and show that your child that you care about them. Maybe how did you discover this? A lot of times you'll find out that they never meant to find it. It found them. It was something on Instagram. Maybe they're not on social media. Maybe they were doing research for school, and an article or an ad popped up that was sexual in nature. Unfortunately, because the porn industry is such a large, I think it's like a $12 billion industry. They reinvest a lot of their marketing dollars towards the younger demographic to get them hooked and become lifelong customers. So, unfortunately, that's the reality of the world we live in. So, how did you discover this? A lot of times they didn't mean to fall into it. They fell into it. That curiosity sparked into addiction, So that kind of, along those lines, recognize that they're not responsible for what gets sent to them. They are accountable for how they respond, and you can teach them how to respond, and that kind of thing. So remind them God's purpose for sexuality. Remind them that, hey, this is what God designed this for. Pornography distorts that. And you can remind them not just the negative effects of pornography. It's good to have that conversation, but remind them the good that is supposed to come out of this area in life. It's such an important, crucial part of life, and God created it for good. So He created it for it to be not the goal of a relationship, but a result of a good relationship, the result of a healthy relationship through the safety and commitment of marriage. And so it's a good thing. It's a powerful thing. And that's what we talked about a lot in week 1 of our series that we've been going through. So remind them of God's purpose for sexuality. When it comes to how you have to discipline, because this is a big one, it's important that we view discipline through the lens of training. I'm going to read to you from 1 Timothy 4, chapter 7. This is Paul writing to Timothy, mentoring him on how to lead the church as he was a young leader. And he's telling Timothy this. He says, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales, which pornography gives us a lot of mythology and old wives' tales about how this is good for you and it's good education, or how it's a good alternative while you're trying to remain celibate and save yourself from marriage. A lot of Christian lies we tell ourselves sometimes. And while that's not what Paul's talking about here, it can apply to this. Rather, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. And that word training can be substituted for the word discipline. Discipline yourself to be godly. And so when you have to discipline your kids when it comes to this stuff, view it through the lens of training. You're training them. What it looks like to be godly, what it looks like to see people the way God does and to respond that way. So something to keep in mind as we try to figure this out. Discipline isn't necessarily punishment. It can, like I said, it can mean training or self-control. So that doesn't mean you don't put in some safeguards, because that's actually what we're going to talk about next. But it does mean it's more than just punishment. So that's all I really want to say about that. It's important to understand, especially for kids, but for all people, this is an issue of emotional coping and relationships. Porn is about way more than just porn. We tend to reduce it to that because we like to compartmentalize things, and our minds just do that. That's just what's natural to us. But everything kind of affects the other in life. And so this is about more than just porn. All sin is basically turning, and I heard this in college, I think from one of my professors. I'll link a video from Focus on the Family that is on this topic, and I'll link that in this video, and they actually talk about this in there as well. All sin is basically our turning to fill legitimate needs through illegitimate means. Meaning, hey, porn is an illegitimate way to fulfill a legitimate need that we have emotionally, relationally. And that's important to keep in mind at the root of all of this. It is not just a physical thing. Porn is highly addictive, as you probably well know. Some studies have been done. There is such thing as porn brain, where they can do MRI scans, and the brain of a porn addict will look very similar to the brain of a heroin addict. And some studies, to various degrees, in claiming how addictive it is. Some say, well, it's as addictive as heroin. Some will say it's like 10 times more addictive than heroin. So I imagine that's up to the individual. But all that to say, it has a highly addictive effect. But the void that porn is looking to fill is a relational void. That's the need it's trying to satisfy. And it's much more than just a physical thing. So this will have a compounding effect, especially when started so young. And it will inhibit kids from learning the right way to regulate emotions, communicate emotions, seek to have their emotional needs filled by real relationships. And so, again, being able to communicate God's intention for sex and sexuality, and trying to address the emotional or relational voids that are going unmet in your child. And that's not necessarily a your fault thing. That's just a life thing. We all have hurts and hang-ups and broken relationships and things that have affected us in life. So whether that's your doing or not, quite frankly, you could be the best parents around, and this would still be something that they could deal with because we live in a fallen world. So just recognize that. So let's get to some practical safeguards. I actually did a whole video on this, which I will try to link in the description below, but just in a general technology safety thing. Well, there's a phone agreement you can have with your kids. I talked about some philosophy on how to treat technology with your kids in a quick, I want to say like 5 or 6 minute video. Did that a couple years ago, so I'll link that below if you want to check that out. It's got a lot of resources in the description of that video. But it's important to have good safeguards, and the goal being that, and they talked about this actually in the Focus on the Family video as well, but the idea that as your kids get older, you want them to be able to handle more responsibility. You want to entrust them with more freedoms. So the way you respond to a 7th grader may be drastically different than the way you respond to a junior in high school, and the amount of freedoms you entrust with them. And that's okay. And you're the parent. You're the one with the relationship with your kid. You're the one that knows them better than anybody. So you need to be prudent about how you instigate and put these safeguards into place. But keep that in mind. Here's some things. Have some watchful accountability. There's some screen sharing apps. Covenant Eyes. I can't remember if that's by Focus on the Family or not, but that's one that a lot of people use. That's good. There's filtering softwares. A lot of Wi-Fi routers have them, or you can put them on phones. You can set up time limits, screen time stuff. I talk about that in the other video as well. There's depending on the age of your kid, you may want to lock down the app store so they can't download anything that you don't want them to have. And here's a kind of a big one that I had discovered recently, and probably another video I will attach in the description of this video that I found a couple months ago. But apparently Spotify is readily making porn available in kids' playlists. And if you don't know, Spotify is a video streaming platform, just as it is a music streaming platform. So they have podcasts on there. A lot of podcasts have videos. And so they're more and more, the older Spotify gets, the more it's integrating video into its software and in their searchability. And that, unfortunately, is bringing this issue there. I haven't looked into it a whole lot, so I don't know exactly what safeguards can be put into place for that. But I'm pretty sure you can search history in Spotify. So just something to be aware of. That's not a safe platform. And so The video I'll attach below talks about some of that. But run fire drills with your kids. I said before, like, they're not responsible for what gets sent to them, only how they respond to it. So, hey, if you're online and you see something, what do? Run those drills with your kids. Talk it through with them in advance. With the verse we read this last week was from 1 Corinthians, where Paul is saying to flee sexual sin. So something comes up, you flee from it. You delete it, you turn it away. You need to come up with your game plan as parents and go with that with your kids. I mentioned this a little bit already, but there's no one size fits all. This is a relational thing, not a formula thing. So each kid is different and requires different levels of attention and discipline and training. So know your kids and implement as such. This was one I had not thought of before, but teach kids to be specific in what they're searching for online, whether it be for homework or this is the example they used. But your kid comes to you, maybe you have a young kid, and he's asking, "Can I look up bunny, pictures of bunny, so that I can, learn how to draw?" Maybe your kid's artistic. Maybe a better search term would be how to draw a picture of a bunny rabbit. Stuff like that. The more specific you are in the search engine, the more specific the results will be, and thus not allowing for the search engine to pull whatever it thinks you might be looking for, whatever is popular. So, whatever is popular on the interwebs is probably not what you want most popular in your home. So that was a good tip I just discovered. This is a big, important one, but talk about the why. Kids need to understand the why. It can be easy for us to brush that off and be like, well, because I said so, or this is how we do it. But explain the why. And that goes back to teaching healthy views on sex and God's design for it. And so it's not that I don't trust you, it's that I don't trust the internet. So I have to put these in place. When I grew up, I didn't have access to this stuff. And so it's much harder for you. Your brain is not developed yet to be able to handle some of this. And that's fine. That doesn't mean I don't trust you, but it doesn't mean I don't trust the internet, and I don't trust everybody that's going to want to interact with you on the internet. So explain the why, and explain that this is not necessarily a trust issue between you and your kid. It's just hey, as a parent, I have a godly responsibility to an authority given to me by God to raise you right, to protect you. And this is a protection thing. It's not a distrust thing. So that's an important thing as well. What's your godly atmosphere in the home like? That's an important one. Think about things like your entertainment choices. Okay, growing up in my house, we didn't have access to the internet till I was a senior in high school, but we did have a lot of movies. And my parent had a closet of movies that was not in the family room. And if I were young and tempted, I would go up there and look in those movies to find something. And so be careful what kind of entertainment you're allowing in your home. If they have access to streaming services, right? Do they have access to mature content that's on Netflix? Stuff like that. Spotify, or not Spotify, YouTube. I'm pretty sure there's different levels of maturity that you're allowed to see that will come up in search results and stuff like that. So entertainment choices, what does that look like in your home? What kind of music is playing through the speakers at your house? Think about those things through the lens of an adolescent or pre-adolescent child, where these issues are new and curious, and it's being dealt with at a different level than your adult brain. So think about those things. Family devos, are those a part of your regular rhythm, or talking through a scripture, or it doesn't even have to be super official, but does it come up at the dinner table? Are you sitting together at the dinner table? Do you pray regularly? Do you model what that looks like in your home? What are your priorities? Do you prioritize things like church and community with other believers, small groups? Do you prioritize maybe certain things over other things, and what you allow your kid to do versus not do, or who they go with or not go with, or what you participate in as a family versus what you don't, all those kinds of things. What's the atmosphere like in your home? Because that will play a huge role into this. Last thing I'll say about this is not a one and done conversation. This is an open-ended, ongoing conversation. And that doesn't have to be a scary thing. In fact, the more it comes up regularly and the more you introduce it into conversations in a godly way, the less awkward it's going to be, right? My parents didn't talk about sex a whole lot growing up. I wouldn't say it was taboo, but it didn't, we just didn't talk about it a whole lot. Chelsea's family joked about it a lot growing up. And so she grew up around that. And it was something that was made to not be a very awkward subject in her home. And so that can be a helpful thing. And it doesn't have to be a big deal, but it could be something as little as like, hey, a commercial came on, you're all watching the Super Bowl together, a commercial comes on, or anything else, and you just say, hey, what's the message of that? What are they trying to do with that commercial? Oh, they're just trying to sell perfume. Okay, well, yeah. But let them answer. Like, hey, what do you think the message was of that? You just see what answers they give you. It'd be kind of fun. You're watching a movie and there's a romance in the movie. How are they telling us relationships are supposed to work? What do you think about that? Do you think that's an accurate portrayal of how God designed it to be? And you just insert those types of questions in your everyday conversations. Maybe your kids are talking about the other kids at their school or friends that they have that are in relationships. Oh, well, what do you think of that? What's godly about it? What's probably not? You can have those conversations and like I said, implement them in just normal everyday stuff. So try to create a godly atmosphere and an open atmosphere where all subjects are safe to talk about. Hopefully this has been helpful for you and beneficial. If you're watching this on our Facebook page, there is actually a group that we have that I just created about a month or two ago. So if you're a parent and you want to be a part of this parent group, I share resources like this in that group. And that's a more collaborative space as well. It's a closed group, but any parents are welcome to join it. So feel free to join that. If you're in the parent group already watching this, thank you for watching. And I'm probably going to put together a parent YouTube channel from Victory to put stuff like this on, so you don't have to search through Facebook groups to find it. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point. Let me know your thoughts. What other tips do you have? Again, this is a collaborative space, so contribute to the conversation. Love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. And let us know if you need anything else at all. Love you guys. Catch you next one.